Welcome everyone back to our studies in financial markets, specifically looking at topic number 2, which is concerning itself with the issue of the exchange market. Now, this lesson is going to provide something of a historical context to the subject that we are covering here, and this means essentially focusing on the history of the exchange market. Now, this isn't particularly too important for anybody who is looking to study financial markets specifically, like what this series of lessons is dedicated to looking at, but it nevertheless provides something of a historical background, of a historical foundation from which we can then think about why we have exchange markets, the importance of exchange markets, and how they were seen as important historically, how they were seen as important in previous civilizations, going all the way back to ancient history, in fact. So essentially, having a good understanding of the historical development of each and every one of these different financial markets, as well as all of their financial instruments, is just a useful way to provide a better picture and to get a better understanding of the fundamental rationales for the existence of each of these particular different kinds of financial market. It's for this reason that, like I said, we'll be spending time in all these lessons looking at the history of all of these financial markets. Specifically then, what we're going to do is outline the following issues. We're going to talk first about the ancient origin of currencies and exchanges of currencies. Of course, you could not have an exchange market without having currency, without having a distinction and a delineation of currency. One of the things that you would study if you did the history of economics is the fact that quite a major event was the shifting away from the basic barter system, where instead of using money, you would trade items for each other. So a sheep for food, for example, or something like that. And the shift away from that to taking the value of those items and attaching those values into some kind of standardized currency was quite a major shift when we think about the economy and when we think about finance. And so we have to think firstly about the origin of currencies as it pertains to the nature of exchanges. We will then look at the modern development, so up to and after the 1800s, and then we will look specifically at the ways in which the exchange markets and exchange rates have been established and thought about between 1945 and the present day, namely after the end of the Second World War. So beginning first then, what are the ancient origins of currencies and the ancient origins of exchanges and the importance of these origins? Well, the concept of trading through currency rather than through barter system, as I've just mentioned, dates back as early as civilization itself. So when I'm saying ancient origins, I'm talking like really ancient origins. Okay, I'm not just talking about ancient Rome, for example. We're going back as almost as early as civilization has existed itself. So, in this regard, with the existence of currencies, there was the existence of exchange. That's essentially the sort of beginning and endings when we think about the history of exchange markets. Because what this is telling us is that where there was the history of a currency, where currency started to crop up, and where there were different currencies, the differential in terms of value would require the existence of exchange rates and exchange markets. So while beginning in the biblical times as fragmented money traders who would be able to perform exchanges for a simple fee, it was the coming of the Byzantine Empire that we see the truly institutionalization of people who offer services essentially to be able to perform exchanges of currencies. Now, the Byzantine Empire, for those who aren't particularly familiar, is sometimes described as the Eastern Roman Empire. Essentially, the Roman Empire would collapse in the West, and Emperor Constantine would establish a new city in Constantinople and establish a new empire that lasts until the 1450s or so, when the Ottomans take it over. And so the Byzantine Empire is sort of seen as an extension of the Roman Empire, or at least one of the extensions of the Roman Empire. Others argue the Holy Roman Empire, of course, has that title as well. So, but it is during this period of Byzantine history that we see the institutionalization of this practice. And it is during the 4th century AD that the institutionalization of trading currencies was done by the Byzantine government, who would ensure a monopolistic level of control over the practice. So it was essentially nationalized, if we're going to be thinking about, if we were to apply modern day terminology to the previously existing practice. The Byzantine Empire nationalized the practice of being able to make exchanges and do exchanges of currencies. That was, of course, to maintain a monopolistic control over that particular practice. And the way this essentially worked was based on the amount of gold or silver coins themselves. So obviously they didn't have a particularly fancy, intricate and detailed system for calculating exchanges and having a computer to do so or anything like that, obviously. But instead it was on the basis of quantity. It meant that essentially there was something of a standardization of currency based on the rarity of the material, such as gold or silver, and the amount of that you had, of course, the wealthier that you were. Similar in the sense of currency today, but less sophisticated, should I say. When we go to the 1800s, we see that the trading of currencies would increase in terms of its popularity, especially with the birth of the United States and the introduction of a number of private firms which are dedicated to the practice of performing exchanges of currencies. So Alex Brown and Sons, for example, was one such private firm in the United States that would offer such services. In 1880, we see the introduction in the United States of something known as the gold standard. This is a major development in terms of the standard by which we value currency. So essentially, the US gold standard in 1880 was a practice by which you would have a monetary system, a macroeconomic policy, in which the value of currency is based on a fixed quantity of gold. Okay, so it is set at the value of gold. It is set at the standard of which gold is viewed as, and this gold standard would form the basis, in fact, for international trade in currencies through the 1880s up until the 1920s or the 1930s. So one of the reasons why it was seen as such an important thing was that it was seen as more stable, in the sense that when you think about valuing something, often in order to value something, you have to compare it to something else. If I want to know the value of something, I have to compare it to something else that is either valuable, and you have to think about whether or not it is more valuable or less valuable than that thing, and that's how you make a comparison, of course. Now, exchanges of currencies is essentially about making that comparison. It's essentially the process by which you make a comparison between what is more or less valuable in certain circumstances. Now, the gold standard, the rationale for the gold standard was to essentially attach that value comparison to something like a fixed quantity of gold. If you have a fixed quantity of gold, that value doesn't change that much, okay, compared to that of currencies, and so you can value currency on the basis of this standard. But it doesn't last, okay, and we get to the sort of post-World War II setting. We see the end of the Second World War, we see the establishment of a variety of new financial institutions, and really, we see the international community coming together to expand on a number of different issues, okay? So this includes all the different kinds of things that we think of that aren't necessarily financial markets related, so the creation of the UN, human rights treaties, the Geneva Conventions, etc., etc., etc. You also get the expansion of international economic institutions at the Bretton Woods Conference. This was the first major development. So the Bretton Woods Accords were signed in 1944, so slightly before the end of the Second World War. And essentially the Bretton Woods Accords would last from 1944 all the way to 1971. And what they would do was allow the currency to fluctuate within a range of 1% of the par exchange value of that currency. And so this would be increased to 2% in terms of a fluctuation in 1971. And you see this takes place, the 2% increase in terms of the fluctuation was done in accordance with the Smithsonian Agreement. The major developments here then were not through international agreement, but through the development of new technologies. So after 1971, new technology becomes the major influence in terms of historical reform of these various different institutions. You get the 1% fluctuation with the Bretton Woods Accords, you get the 2% fluctuation in 1971 with the Smithsonian Agreement, and then post that you get the use of the computer. Now, the computer would be a very valuable item when it comes to making exchanges because it would be able to calculate and be able to work out exchanges very quickly as early as the 1970s. And so when we get to the 1990s, we see that there was something of a decline in the exchange markets for a couple of reasons. Okay, so the first reason is that we see the introduction of a new currency. Now, the euro is so important for one very important reason. The euro is a unified European currency. And so, essentially, prior to the introduction of the euro, of course, you would have an economic system in the European Union, or the European community, should I say, where each of the different member states would have different currencies, and they would trade in those different currencies. Now there is a standardized currency across the European Union. Everybody works on the euro. But one of the things that is quite problematic about the euro is the fact that the member states of the European Union are quite vast. They're quite large. Obviously, not all of the member states of the European Union have adopted the euro. The Eurozone is a specific area within the European Union, but still, many countries have adopted the euro. And the problem with that is that these countries are all very different in terms of their economies. So Germany and France, for example, are quite major economies. Greece is a little bit less of a major economy. And so where there is a decline in an economy, or where there might be slipping into a recession, or there might be certain problems that a good macroeconomic policy could alleviate, this is hampered by being in the Eurozone because the control of the money supply in the European Union isn't done by the individual member states. So, for example, where there is a slowing down, let's say, of inflation or something of that nature, or the risk of deflation in an economy, which is obviously very, very bad, one of the things that a central bank would do would be to issue new currency as part of a process known as quantitative easing. But the problem with that is that the euro is not controlled by these member states. So if that's happening in one member state, they are essentially unable to make any of these changes. So that's one of the things that's very difficult, and one of the things that we see when we look at the Eurozone crisis and all of these different kinds of things, where the certain economies do really suffer under the process of the euro. And of course, there are good reasons to have the euro. A lot of people still keep the euro and would continue to keep the euro. It's not exactly me saying that it is all terrible, but that's just one of the things that was seen as quite a problematic issue that had to have been resolved when it comes to the development of and the creation of a single unified currency. This isn't obviously something that is unique to the European Union. Any regional agreement that would adopt a financial unification, would adopt a financial currency, might be facing similar problems. A second reason that we see a decline in the exchange markets in the 1990s is that we see the banking industry consolidation. This led to significant reduction in the number of firms that were going to be engaging in foreign exchange market systems. And so we'll get into this in a future lesson. But generally speaking, we see something of a decline in the exchange markets in the 1990s for these reasons. Okay. So that really concludes our overall very brief historical overview of the ways in which exchange markets work, the ways in which currencies require and necessitate the existence of exchange markets. The next few lessons are going to start to talk about them in more technical detail, focusing on the nature of exchange markets and how they work a little bit more substantively.